It appears that the BBC, or the British Broadcasting Company, is going through some significant changes right now after Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, and also Deborah Turnus, who's the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs, announced that they were going to resign. And this is coming after massive backlash over a Panorama documentary where they were accused of misleadingly editing a speech by U.S. President Donald Trump after the January 6 events. Here's the clip.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Now, the controversy for this thing erupted last week and was centered on claims of editorial bias in the program, quote, Trump a Second Chance, that was aired in October of 2024 during the U.S. presidential election campaign. Now, a lot of people are arguing that this is like the tipping point for the BBC's impartiality, or whether or not they're going to be able to be considered a legitimate media organization ever again, because it was very apparently done in a misleading way. And you can see it in the clip. Now, both Tim Davie and Deborah Turnus cited accountability for, quote, mistakes as a key reason for why they were stepping down. But here's the thing that's even crazier about this. The BBC is approaching a critical royal charter review in 2027, which will literally determine its funding and regulatory framework. So this is a huge black eye on that review, and could very well cost them having the network entirely. Interestingly enough, Tim Davie, he's been a BBC veteran for over 20 years. He's been there for 20 years at this company. He was appointed as the 17th Director General in September of 2020, and he succeeded Lord Tony Hall, where he oversaw the broadcaster's editorial, operational, and creative direction during some relatively turbulent times, I would say, especially considering that was during the pandemic. Now, before he became the Director General, he was the CEO of BBC Studios, which is the commercial arm of the BBC, and he had held like marketing roles at PepsiCo and Procter & Gamble, as well as other global firms. He earned himself the nickname, quote, Teflon Tim, for weathering and enduring a lot of controversial stuff. And he emphasized the BBC's role as a gold standard for journalism while defending its license fee funded model against critics who accused it of being a left-leaning, biased organization. Now, Deborah Turnus was appointed the CEO of BBC News in 2022 and brought extensive experience from leading ITN, which was UK's independent television news, and NBC News International. She managed a whole global news operation of about 6,000 staff, producing content in over 40 languages for nearly 500 million viewers weekly. Under her leadership, BBC News expanded digital reach, but faced a lot of criticism for perceived imbalances in international reporting, particularly on the Middle East. She's also been a vocal advocate for diverse and inclusive journalism. This sometimes compromised her ability to remain neutral. Now, like I said, this whole thing stems from that documentary that was filmed by the BBC Panorama called Trump a Second Chance, which was a 1-hour investigative program that was produced in-house and broadcast on October of 2024 during the election season for the United States presidency. Now, through this documentary, they examined Trump's political comeback, focusing on his role in the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol riot, and critics alleged that the film deliberately distorted Trump's speech from that day to portray him as directly inciting violence, which obviously breaches not only the BBC editorial guidelines on accuracy and impartiality, but honestly breaches any impartiality or accuracy guidelines of just about any major news organization on planet Earth, as far as I'm concerned, if they're a legitimate one. Now, as you saw in the clip earlier, they clipped it out to make it say, we're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you, and we fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Played the following clip.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell.
But Trump didn't in fact say this at all. The BBC spliced together two clips that took place 54 minutes apart. So let's go through it again.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you.
Now, see there, between Capitol and, that's a cut. Here's what Trump actually said.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
It's different. It wasn't until nearly an hour later that he then said the second part of the BBC's version.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we fight. We fight like hell.
And what this did is it created a false narrative that implied that the president was explicitly directing the crowd to storm the Capitol violently. And they very deliberately omitted things like cheer on, peacefully, and anything else that was saying, hey, we're not going down there to cause trouble. We're just going to peacefully cheer on our congressmen and senators who are in the state capitol building. Now, this issue resurfaced on November 3rd of 2025 after an exclusive Daily Telegraph report based on a leaked memo from Michael Prescott, who's a former independent external advisor to the BBC's Editorial Standards Committee. And Michael Prescott was a whistleblower, and he raised the edit with BBC managers post-broadcast, but he claimed that they dismissed it as non-breaching. Now, in his memo, which was titled Whistleblowing Report, he warned of, quote, systemic problems in BBC journalism and called for urgent reforms. Now, when the Telegraph published their article about it, it ignited a media firestorm all over the place, with the BBC expected to issue an apology to Parliament on November 10th of 2025. It is now November 9th of 2025, and like I said, the Director General of the BBC and also the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs have both resigned. They communicated their decisions to resign in internal audits on November 9th and framed them as acts of accountability amid, quote, polarizing times. Now, the president just responded to this on his Truth Social account saying, quote, the top people in the BBC, including Tim Davie, the boss, are all quitting, fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, in parentheses, perfect, speech of January 6th. Thank you for the Telegraph for exposing these corrupt journalists. They are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election. On top of everything else, they are from a foreign country, one that many consider our number one ally. What a terrible thing for democracy. Now get this, the BBC is primarily funded by a licensing fee, a TV licensing fee, that is a compulsory annual payment required from most UK households and individuals to legally watch or record live television broadcasts or use BBC's on-demand service, BBC iPlayer, or any device. This includes streaming live content via apps or websites and other things like that. The fee is not specific to the BBC, but it's a household tax that supports the public service broadcasters' operations, including news, radio, and online services. It was introduced in 1946 and is governed by the Communication Act of 2003, with the BBC responsible for issuing licenses and collecting revenue through its contractor, TV Licensing. Now, as of April 1st of 2025, the fee has risen to nearly £175 for a standard color TV license, which is actually a £5 increase from the previous £169, and non-payment of this is a criminal offense and punishable by a fine of up to £1,000 plus legal costs. And from what a lot of the public sentiment that I've read about in 2025, a lot of folks over there believe that this fee is outdated, with some advocating for its abolition in favor of a targeted public funding for BBC News and Education. Now, like I said earlier in the video, the Royal Charter is up for review for the BBC right now, and it's the legal foundation of the BBC defining its public purposes, governance, and its funding model. And it gets renewed roughly every 10 to 11 years by the UK government following a public consultation process. The current charter, which began on January 1st of 2017, expires on December 31st of 2027. And who knows what could happen during that review? There could be a lot of changes coming. Who knows? I'm not going to hold my breath because there's a lot of weird things going on in the UK right now, but there could possibly be some sweeping changes, especially with the significant blow to credibility that they have suffered from this. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, because this is pretty wild.